Hello and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer, and I am absolutely thrilled to have you join us for another fantastic episode. Before we dive in, don't forget to check out our website, themfgconnector.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And hey, if you love discovering innovative solutions for manufacturing challenges, be sure to check out our other show, The Manufacturing Connector, on YouTube. Today, we have a truly exceptional guest who embodies the very essence of innovation and transformation in manufacturing. Eric Whitley is a seasoned professional with over 30 years of experience in technology and manufacturing operations. As the Director of Industrial Transformation at L2L, a leading connected workforce platform software provider, Eric is renowned for his passion for driving operational excellence and leveraging cutting edge technology to revolutionize manufacturing processes. Eric's impact on the industry is monumental. Not only has he published numerous articles and been a sought after keynote speaker on various manufacturing topics, but he also hosts the Manufacturing Stream podcast, where he shares his invaluable insights. His expertise doesn't stop there, though. Eric has led the Total Productive Maintenance Initiative at Autoliv ASP and served as an adjunct faculty member at The Ohio State University, contributing to their maintenance and management certificate programs at the Fisher College of Business. Outside of his professional achievements, Eric enjoys the tranquility of northern Utah with his wife of 35 years. When he's not helping manufacturers bridge the gap between digital technology and the factory floor, you can find him standing in a river with a fly rod in his hand, embracing his love for fly fishing. Get ready for an engaging conversation packed with insights, stories, and a whole lot of passion for the manufacturing industry. Let's dive into it. Welcome to the podcast, Eric. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jim. Thanks for the introduction, man. It's humbling to hear somebody say that stuff, and I don't know who you're talking about, but I don't know if it's me that you're talking about or not there, but I appreciate that. So thanks. It's great to be here.
You're very welcome, man. You're very welcome. So, Eric, tell us your story, right? What sparked your interest in this industry? How did your journey begin? You don't have to start with like it was a dark and stormy night, but you can if you want.
I can. Yeah.
It's up to you. It's your story.
I'll tell you the story. Here's this is the beginning is that as a kid, I can remember sitting out in Southgate, Southern California, waiting for my dad to come out of Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. He was a maintenance guy at the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Southgate.
Okay.
And I can remember my mom, back in those days, you had one car. And so mom would drop dad off at work, and in the morning he worked graveyard. In the morning we'd get up at 6 a.m. and drive the 12 or 13 miles to his plant and watch him walk out of that manufacturing plant. So manufacturing really has been kind of in my blood ever since I was a kid. So it's not anything that was new to me to roll into manufacturing,
Wow.
And so when I started, my career and stuff, I worked in manufacturing. I used to rebuild car parts, torque converters, worked in a shop that rebuilt torque converters for transmission. Spent a lot of time and still do have a great deep love and passion for auto racing and building race cars. I built race cars when I was younger. So the being a maker of things, being a manufacturer and a fixer of things has kind of always been in my blood. So growing up in Southern California, I did take a job for a little while when I worked in a race shop. And what we did was we built engines and, and decked the heads and decked the blocks and stuff like that. I was running some parts, and there was a guy who kept coming into the race shop. He was having an engine build. He was having a blown Buick built for his boat. And at the same time, I was young and I was going out, I was probably 21, 22 years old. I met this girl at a nightclub, and I asked her out on a date. And so on our very first date, we were talking about what we do for a living and all this kind of stuff. And I was telling her, I said, there's this one guy who comes into the shop, and man, he just talks my ear off. And I cannot get him to shut up, I mean, he just talks my ear off. And I said, he's building a Buick. He's putting a Buick in a boat. And she looked at me and she said, well, my dad's putting a Buick in a boat, and it was her dad. And so, yeah, that's how my life got started with my wife. Was I insulted her father right there in front of her on the first date. So the reason why that's pertinent to the story is because then it became time to go meet the parents, and her mom was a director in HR at McDonnell Douglas in Long Beach, California at the time.
Wow. Okay.
And she basically looked at me and said, if you are going to date my daughter, then you need a better job than selling race car parts and building engines, And like 3 weeks later, I was working at McDonnell Douglas, and that's how I got started in that major manufacturing. So I worked at McDonnell Douglas. I was on the first flight team for the MD-11, first flight team for the T-45 Navy trainer, and first flight team for the C-17 airlifter. And so every time I see one of them big, beautiful airplanes flying around, I was there for the day that it flew off for the very first time. I was assigned to the T-1 aircraft and got to watch that first aircraft go all the way through assembly, and followed it because I was in the parts department. And I tell somebody, I remember picking my dad up at his house it was a Saturday morning, and we went and backed my truck up to the Long Beach airport. And I watched over on the ramp was the T-1 aircraft, was my airplane. And I could hear the engines. We had given it to the ramp, so I was done with it. But I could hear the engines running up, running down, running up, running down. And about 3:30 in the afternoon, it rolled out and went down to the end of the runway. And as it came at us, you could see that the pilot lifted the nose gear off the ground, and it was coming at us at an angle. And just as it got to the crowd, he lifted the rear wheels off the ground. And that's the very first time that the C-17 had ever flown in the air. And I remember thinking, there goes my job. It was flying off to Edwards Air Force Base for testing. And so that's kind of how I got my start in manufacturing, and was one of those pivotal moments in my career where I watched this airplane. When I started there, I was washing the floors and sweeping and moving parts, and people would hand me this paperwork that said C-17 on it. It was just tooling at the time when I started. And then I got to be a part of it all the way to where I watched it actually fly off into the sunset. So that's kind of where I got started in manufacturing, and
that's amazing.
Everything rolled from there. So yeah, it was great. It was a great opportunity. I learned a lot about the manufacturing process because I worked, in the tooling jig and fixture shop. I went to go work in where we were making the parts. And then as the parts got made, I got transferred over into assembly. And then I went from assembly to the first flight team. And so it was really kind of cool to be able to follow that thing all the way through there. So
that's awesome. That's really neat. I mean, I used to build houses, Eric, up in northern Colorado. And so every time I go back to the Steamboat Springs area, I can drive by some of those places that I built or worked on. So I know the feeling, right? But what I built stands on the ground, right? You built something that went over your head, right? That's pretty astronomical.
Yeah, I think the reason why I tell that story is because, in manufacturing, I mean, we are definitely suffering a worker shortage or worker skill level, trying to get people involved in manufacturing. And one of the things that I try to use that story for is to teach people how important it is to stick with something. What you're doing right now may not be the most glamorous thing in the world, but at some point in time, you're going to be able to look back on your career and you're going to be able to see, gosh, I was there when it was this, and now I'm there when it's this, and watched it fly away. And so that's what happens in manufacturing, is that you start off on a production line, you start off making parts, but but I guarantee that almost every plant manager, almost every senior VP of operations that you talk to was on the manufacturing floor at some point in time.
Yeah.
They started off as an engineer or a mechanic or an operator on the shop floor. And now they've stuck with it and learned and used that learning and applied it and moved on and moved on. Now they're in these senior executive positions 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And it's only because they understood that I've got to learn this, I've got to learn this, and I got to learn this, you know. So it's really important. And that's why I tell that story, is because it's just important for younger folks getting involved in manufacturing to know that, yeah, it may not be the most glamorous thing the first 2 or 3 years you're in manufacturing, but you can apply and you can move up and have a career in manufacturing as well.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. It is a sustainable career path.
yeah, it truly is. Truly
And
is.
I mean, there's so much to unpack, but I want to back up a little bit. You painted such an amazing picture with your dad walking out of that plant, right?
Yeah.
And coming from somebody who, and I do want to get post, McDonnell Douglas part of
Yeah.
your career here in a
Yeah.
moment. But going back to that time, your dad walking out, that was where a lot of the perception of the dark, dirty, dangerous, the 3Ds of manufacturing, that's
Yes.
where that perception
Yeah.
came from. How do we get back to a place and time in your estimation where we don't think of it as that dark, dirty, dangerous? Because a lot of the shops that I've been in, sure, there are still shops that are not great, right? Don't have
Yeah.
AC. I know a number of shops here in Arizona even that don't have AC. They work off of swamp
Right.
coolers, right? It's gross
Right.
in there. And they
Right.
have a hard time retaining employees because of it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
But how do we, the majority of places that I've been in have been very clean. You could eat off of the floor. You could eat out of the machines. I mean, it's a clean place. How do we get that joy of manufacturing paired with the new reality of what manufacturing is in your eyes?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great point, because you think, just let's talk cleanliness of the plants as a thing, right? I mean, I've been fortunate enough to watch that, and I think the lean movement, the 5S movement, all of those continuous improvement movements have led to that. A lot of plants, you rarely, I mean, they're, as you said, they're still here, but rarely do you walk into a plant anymore and it's dirty.
Yeah.
And there's stuff laying around. Back when I started in manufacturing, it was nothing to see a stack of pallets that have been sitting there for a year and a half, and empty drums and paper towels on the floor. I mean, that's just how it was. And the dirt that would collect in, and that doesn't happen anymore. And I think there's a couple of things that's have added to that. One is that we have a culture that has grown up in that process, and that's not acceptable anymore, right?
Okay.
The other thing is that we have in academia, when I started to learn lean and started to learn total productive maintenance and all that stuff, it wasn't in academia. Now you go to school, and if you're an engineer or if you're somebody that's required learning, is let's talk about 5S. Let's talk about continuous improvement. Let's talk about Six Sigma. And we're learning that. So we're gaining that. I think what you're asking though is where do we merge all that thought process with this great passion that people have of making something and building something and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that is, one, it has to be put on the onus on the manufacturing company itself. I mean, I don't want to be a Mike Rowe here and sit and talk about, all of that stuff. But I think the companies have to understand that, and we go back to my dad. My dad, he was a high school educated person. He was a maintenance mechanic. He made a good living. He provided for his family, his wife, his 3 kids. We took vacations. We built a swimming pool in our backyard in Southern California. Wow. All of those kind of simple things all came from a career in manufacturing, not a career as in an engineer or a senior vice, but a maintenance mechanic could make a decent living, and he could have that stability. And he knew that. we need a little bit more of that back in manufacturing. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
That we need the leaders in manufacturing to understand that and kind of create that environment. But the other thing too is that, I currently work for a technology company, and we have to we have to understand the new workforce. Who is the new workforce, and how do they work, and how do they act, and how do they communicate, and then using technology to kind of help us do that. So it really is just an understanding of that. There are things we can do in order to try to get back to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So also another point I wanted to ask, you worked on race cars. You worked
Yeah.
on, so what is your favorite kind of auto racing?
I tell everybody I love, if it has an internal combustion engine in it, then I love to racing. Richard Petty. I think a famous quote from Richard Petty was that somebody asked, when was auto racing invented, and he said the day they made the second car. That's when auto racing was.
That's
but
a great quote.
I grew up drag racing, so I built super gas, super comp cars. Helped my neighbor actually had a shop next to us, and so go over there. It's where I learned how to weld. It's where I learned how to build engines, stuff like that. Just help building those race cars. So I love drag racing. I'm a big fan. So that's where my passion lies.
I love it.
Yeah.
Eric, along those lines, I'm a big F1 fan. I love the intricacies. I love the teamwork. I love the fastest 2 seconds in sports, right? And those pit stops. Like it's just, it's all amazing to me. Being in the US, I don't get to watch as many because, they air at like 3 a.m.
Right.
And I'm 45 and not up at 3 a.m. anymore. But I look at your history and where you've been and your love of making things and working on things and creating and being that maker and proud of your skill set. Do you think that when you were younger, it was easier for you to tinker and create that love of things? Because I look at some of these vehicles now, you almost need to be an engineer just to get into the engine compartment to be able to tinker. And then it's all electrical, right? So I look at you and I are, I'm sure, similar in age, right? It was easy for us to go under the hood of the Bug that my parents had. And I could literally take things out and put them back in and it would still run, right? But now you can't necessarily do that. Do you think that has led in any way, shape, or form to these kids today not being as interested because they can't just take things apart and put them back together?
Yeah, I don't doubt it for a minute. And I can jump years ahead now and tell you that, one of the things I've done with my boys, and one of the things that we do with my grandkids now, is my oldest grandson is 14, 15 years old. He has a dirt bike. It's like, okay, you're going to have a dirt bike, and this dirt bike you need to work on. I just took him over the other day. I found somebody had an old, do you remember the old Cox airplanes?
Yes.
The gas-powered airplanes.
Absolutely.
And so we found a gas-powered four-wheel drive truck, remote control gas-powered four-wheel drive truck. And I took that over to him. And so we're working on getting that. So I think that but I do agree with you totally that there's so many missed opportunities, or the amount of opportunities have dwindled for the younger generations to find things to tinker on and to build on and to make and stuff like that. My youngest grandson, he's a massive Lego person, and so he's always trying. But where do you take that? Where do you take that thought process of, I build Legos? All right, what's the next level when you become 13 or 14 years old?
Yep.
You don't want to build Legos anymore unless you want to build $800, Star Cruisers or whatever. But where do you take that, and how do you apply that to that next level? And I think that I don't want to get into a parental podcast here, but I think that parents and people like that have to give these kids opportunities to keep on that level. Yeah. And we talked a little bit in the introduction. one of the things that we do is tie flies. I
Right.
mean, it's important for my grandkids to learn how to tie their own flies if we're going to go
That's cool.
fishing, so
That's
that they
awesome.
get the feeling of accomplishment. I learned this, I did it, I tied it, and I caught a fish on it. And so that really is important as well. So I do think I think you're spot on with the fact that there's not a lot of opportunity for people to kind of apply that next level of tinkering. So
Yeah.
exactly.
And I have a 10-year-old boy, 14-year-old daughter, right? And son loves Legos. Daughter loved Legos, but she's 14 now to that
Right.
point. And uh, but I remember when COVID happened and they weren't in school anymore. I had a lawnmower that quit on me that spring, so we tore it apart. We
Yes,
literally
yes,
disassembled the engine.
yes,
And so I was looking what is next, right? Where, and even like, there is no resource, there is nothing that you can go to and find. How do you rebuild? How do you disassemble? I mean, to your point, there are Legos, there are all those things, but when we were, you could build little motors, little steam motors, and they would
yes,
come in kits, or
yes,
they would give you a back of comic books. You can buy that instruction manual on how to build your own steam motor, right?
yeah,
It just
yeah,
seemed way more ingrained in our culture, our
right,
society back then,
right. I agree.
versus now, where it's knowledge and it absorbing knowledge through the internet. I mean, these kids carry around supercomputers in their pockets that would have
Yeah,
taken up your and my entire family room if we had that kind of processing
right,
power back when
right,
we were
right.
kids, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's amazing. So after McDonnell Douglas, where'd you go next?
yeah. I mean, that's the next part of the story is because I worked at McDonnell Douglas, had a great time there, learned a lot there. And then took a job with, at the time, was a company called Morton Thiokol, which became Morton, which became Autoliv,
Okay.
which was the airbag company, safety. A lot of people don't know the story that the airbag was actually invented here in northern Utah. But yeah, out at the company Morton Thiokol. So out here where I live is where the space shuttle solid rocket boosters were built.
Okay.
A lot of the Minutemen missiles are built right out here, about 30 miles from my house. But the technology of an early airbag was basically, it was a small rocket motor inside your steering wheel that went off when you got in an accident and filled up a bag, right? And so we got to watch that happen. And I tell everybody the story that when I first started at Autoliv, the airbag industry, these new airbag things were kind of getting started. This was early 80s.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember this, but gosh, I don't know the exact year, maybe 90, 91, somewhere. Congress actually passed a law that said that every new car has to have a driver's side airbag in it. Right? It
Interesting. I did
was a
not know
law.
that. Yeah.
So now, let me tell you, if you ever work in an industry where the government mandates that everybody buy one of your products, life gets really good really fast,
Sure.
right? And it gets really hectic really fast. And so we went from 2 production lines in this 115,000 square foot building, to like 20 in like 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so it was awesome to be a part of that. And that's kind of where then, as we were growing, my manager, I was a production line supervisor at the time, and my manager came to me and handed me a brochure and said, there's this thing called total productive maintenance. I want you to go learn about it. And so I went off and learned that. And that's a whole other story. And I really need to introduce you to a lady by the name of Maureen Fahey. Maureen Fahey has an amazing story. She was there
Okay.
with a guy by the name of Norman Bodek. And Norman was the guy who brought all of these Japanese masters over into the United States. And I got to learn that from Norman
Wow.
and from Maureen. Got to learn total productive maintenance. And so I started implementing TPM at Autoliv in the early 90s, 93, 94, and start talking about things like that. And that's kind of where, as we became more successful in doing that, more and more people wanted to come see how we did it.
Yeah.
And when we started to implement that stuff, and then finally, that's kind of what happened, was like somebody said, hey, you probably should go do consulting. You probably could leave this manufacturing stuff and go do total productive maintenance consulting, because there's a lot of companies that want you to come in and teach them how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's when then I left and went to go do total productive maintenance consulting, and have been all the way up until the time that I joined L2L and started working on taking all of the lean thought processes and the digital, or the total productive maintenance and 5S and all that, and turning that into the digital transformation world. But up until then, I tell everybody, I've been everywhere from standing in the oil sands of northern Alberta, Canada, in minus 40 weather, to standing in the shirt manufacturing and the cloth manufacturing in Honduras. Wow. And everywhere in between, and all of those factories in between. So that's kind of where I've gotten all of the knowledge and stuff. And that's where the Ohio State stuff came in as well, is that when I was doing consulting, a company by the name of Productivity Incorporated, which is where Maureen was the founder, they were running these leadership and management certification classes out of the Fisher College School of Business. And they asked me to come in there and teach in there as well.
So how did that teaching, how did your involvement at OSU there influence your professional perspective and the things that you were doing on the professional side?
Yeah, the one thing that doing something like that is, and people would send their executives in from all over the world in order to come in and be a part of this program. So you were getting, I remember people from food industry, and getting people from the aircraft industry, and from automotive, and just all the different sectors and industries coming in to learn a general concept about how to run a business, how to run a manufacturing business. And one of the things that I started to form some thought processes around was, well, as a consultant, forever, you'll go into a factory and somebody will say, Eric, I know you've been in automotive, but we make cookies here and we're different. We're way different. And so I need you to understand that we're very different than the, people that make steering wheels or whatever. But in reality, if you think about it, what a manufacturing company does, it takes raw material and it converts it into a sellable product. The thing that does that are people and equipment and processes. And so if you begin to understand business at that level, that you can walk into some place that makes cookies, or you can walk into some place that makes cars, and they are taking raw material, putting it through processes and machines with people, and making an end product. If you start to understand business on that level, then you can start helping a bunch of different businesses, because it all applies. Now, if you want to go down one level further and you start talking about the production lines themselves, every production line, I don't care where you go, has electrical issues. It has drive systems. It has mechanical issues. It has basic fasteners on it. It has hydraulics. Now, those things may do different things, but the principles, a hydraulic system is a hydraulic system. I don't care what you're making. And so if you understand all of that at that level, this is funny because it rolls into exactly a conversation I was having yesterday. I was on a different podcast yesterday, but the thought process around, we just don't have skilled workers anymore, right? People are lacking in skills. Well, what they're lacking is they're lacking just the basic knowledge, understanding. It's not how to make a cookie. It's how to run a piece of equipment. That's the skill that we're lacking, and kind of, that our whole conversation kind of ties back into the same thing. It's just that basic fundamental knowledge of how things work and how to apply that thought process to the production line. So
absolutely. How did you transition into the role at LTL, continuing on this journey of yours? You left Autoliv, you were TPM. How did you then get into
Yeah, so that's a great little story in and of itself, because before I left Autoliv, myself, a couple of the maintenance guys, we began to understand that we needed to have a better way to capture data.
Okay.
And so what happened was is that we created a couple of roles, and we called it a dispatcher. And the dispatcher was a person, back, I mean, a lot of maintenance people still use maintenance organizations who use radios, right? And so the production line would usually call maintenance, my machine's down, right? Okay,
Right.
we'll be right over, whatever. And they still do that. What we did is we put a middle person in there, and we said, okay, production, when you have a piece of equipment that's down, we want you to call on channel 1. We want you to call dispatch, my welder's down. Dispatch would take the data. Okay, what line, what time was it? All of that. Okay, great. Dispatch would turn their radio to channel 2 and go, Joe, the welder on line A is down. I need you to go over there. And Joe would say, okay. And so now I sent Joe over there. So that little process became an Excel sheet.
Wow.
And then it became an Access database.
Got
And
it.
then we brought in some programmers and then we started showing that. Well, I left. That was about 1998. I left
Okay.
to become a consultant. But that whole process became more and more ingrained into the process there at Autoliv, to the point that it became a software.
Wow.
And people would come into L2L or come into Autoliv, walk the plant floor, and go, "Where'd you get that software?" And the answer was, "Well, we developed it ourselves." And then so then in late thousands during the crash, Autoliv said, "Get rid of that. We're not a
Wow.
software company."
Okay.
Because the guy I'm going to talk about here in a second, actually started selling the software outside as kind of a side business at Autoliv.
Oh, wow.
Right. So
Okay.
companies like Bose, Energizer actually bought the software and were using the software. And that's when Autoliv said, get rid of it. Well, when Bob Argyle, when he left Autoliv, he took the software and turned it into L2L.
Got it.
And then when he did that, he called me and said, hey, I need you to come back and help me because I need somebody who can talk about manufacturing and software at the same time. And I need you to come and help and go help install this at plants and stuff like that. And so in 2014, then I went to go work for the guy I had worked with at Autoliv, and joined into L2L. That's how I got started here. And then, so cool. This process was just a how do you help manufacturing companies get on board on the technology and the digital revolution and the digital transformation process.
Yeah.
And then, like everybody else, when COVID hit, everybody's job roles changed. And I stopped traveling 40 weeks a year and went to traveling 0 weeks a year. Right. And so I still do. I'm actually sitting in my studio at my home. This is a studio that I built so that we could start doing the stuff online. And that's how I kind of got into this role of being the evangelist, if you will, and talking and doing the podcast. I do the podcast right here. And so that has kind of morphed into this deal where now this is kind of all I do. I speak at events, I do my podcast, and do your podcast and stuff like that. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Let's talk about the podcast real quick, right? The Manufacturing Stream podcast.
Yeah.
It's a good show. How did this come about? How did you get started? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So as I moved into this new role, I moved over into marketing. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a conversation with clients, with non-clients. We wanted to use it as a way to learn what people were thinking in the industry, what they're doing. And then also to highlight, for us, it is produced under the guise of L2L. So hearing how people have been successful in using L2L, stuff like that. What's interesting is, and kind of fun about the whole deal, is that it's called the Manufacturing Stream podcast for a reason, is because my co-host, Phil Anderson, who has recently taken the job, he's now the vice president of IT for a company called Honeyville, but he and I are fishing buddies. And so
Oh,
at the beginning of every podcast, we talk a little bit about fishing and like what we did this week and
cool.
tying flies. And we went to Alaska last year and fished Alaska, fly
Oh,
fished for salmon in Alaska. That was great. As a matter of fact, we did a whole episode on only, like, we have to be careful. Like, we don't talk too much about fishing. We talk about manufacturing most of the time, but
yeah.
we always talk a little bit about fishing. But then we did a whole episode only on Alaska. It's my number one downloaded show.
Is it
It's just
really?
yeah. So we're like, maybe we should do like a fishing podcast as well,
There you go.
So that's kind of in the works. But yeah, so that's why it's called the manufacturing stream. We talk with, I kind of bounce around on topics. We talk a lot about lean, a lot about maintenance. We talk a lot about AI, the digital revolution, and just different topics like that. And don't try to, and a lot like what you and I are doing here. We don't
Yeah.
try to get too serious about it. It's not a platform to sell anything. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to have a conversation. And as you well know, it's stinking fun, man. It's just fun
I
doing
love this.
podcasts.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know why it's so fun, but it just is. And so I love it. And the people you get to meet. I mean, we had a summit here. We do our user conference every year. And I had Kyle Petty as the keynote speaker for
Wow.
our user summit. So I had Kyle on the podcast. And so Kyle Petty was on the podcast.
That's cool.
Larry McReynolds from Fox News, or Fox Race Car, NASCAR Fox, was on last year.
Wow.
So we've had a number of different people on. It's been fun. Really,
That's
really
really
fun.
cool. I dig that.
Yeah.
So you've had a high profile career. You've had a very storied career. You've been a lot of places. You've done a lot of things. You've had a lot of experiences.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how you've been able to balance that high profile career, that accomplishment, the results, the accountability that you've had throughout your career with your personal life, because I've always found that to be challenging. I know a lot of the listeners who listen or watch this show find it challenging as well. So how have you found that balance, and how big of a role has fly fishing played in that ability to balance?
Yeah, three things I always talk about when it comes to this. The one thing is that I have an amazing spouse. She's supported me through all. I mean, 1 year I traveled 48 weeks and
Wow.
she loves her time alone, and so that makes life really easy.
Yeah.
She likes to be alone as well, so that makes things nice. The other thing I will tell you, I know exactly where I was. This was probably 2 or 3 years into traveling for a career. I remember taking my swimsuit with me. I was doing some work in Minnesota. It was cold. It was during the middle of winter. And I took my swimsuit with me because I just happened to glance at the hotel that I was staying at had an indoor hot tub.
Cool.
And I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go sit in that hot tub. And that
Yeah.
was kind of the first time that I remember allowing myself to kind of enjoy a little bit of the amenities of some of the things of the traveling. And I remember thinking, okay, I've got to start doing this more while I'm on the road.
Yeah.
I've got to, all of these hotels have pools. I'm going to go do some laps. I'm going to sit in the hot tub. I'm going to go find a decent restaurant and have a decent meal or whatever, and not try to work on it from a minimalist standpoint, but from kind of enjoy. And then the other thing, and this was some great sage advice that I got from one of the consultants that I worked with early on in my career. And he said, listen, when you're home, you have to be home.
Yeah.
Right. He says, we do our work when we get on the airplane on Monday morning and we get off the airplane on Friday night. That's work. But when you're home, you have to be home. And so, it's even with, I say I travel 40 weeks a year. Well, that's 16, 20 weeks or 10 weeks a year that I don't travel. My boys, as they grow up, they'll tell you stories about where we can remember going on vacation for 3 weeks in a row, like that. So you have to really make the conscious decision to work and not work.
I
when you
like it.
have the opportunity not to work. Fly fishing is a big part of that. Fishing has always been in my life. I've been a fisherman, and I will tell you that I have, over, much like I've done in my career, my hobbies and fishing and stuff like that has morphed. Years ago, I remember thinking I'm going to go do tournament bass fishing. And so I did tournament bass fishing for years and
Very
learned how
cool.
to do that. And then as I've gotten a little older and have gotten a little more into it, I started collecting old antique fishing lures. But now now tie flies. That's all kind of morphed into it's a learning thing for me. It's just I want to learn new things. I constantly want to learn new things. Fly fishing is just the evolution of that. I recently sold my motorized fishing boat and bought a drift boat. And so
Cool.
now we're doing only river fishing, only with a drift boat in Ohio, or I'm not Ohio, but Idaho,
Okay.
Montana,
Yeah, yeah.
all the rivers that are up in that area. So it's just an evolution of learning for me. It's just constantly learning how to do new things is really where I have spent my. I'll tell you, one of the greatest parts of my career was I did some work for a company called Schindler Elevator. Schindler Elevator actually has a manufacturing plant on the Gettysburg battlefield. And I spent I think it was 2 years, I spent a week a month for 2 years in Gettysburg on the battlefield. I used to eat lunch, go grab a Subway sandwich and go sit. And one guy came up to me one day, he's like, "Hey, have you ever researched your family and how they're tied in with the Civil War?" Never have. And come to find out, I did some genealogy, did some research, and one of my ancestors has a monument on the Gettysburg battlefield where they were. J.A. Whitley of the 56th North Carolina
Wow.
was a part of Pickett's charge. And I didn't find that out till like a year after I had started that. So that kind of back to your question, you've got to embrace the interesting things during your career. Don't just make it all about your career. Constantly look for ways to incorporate fun stuff inside of what you do every single day. And that really makes a big difference in what I do. It really
I
does.
love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of playing off of that, and it could be the same answer, right?
Yeah.
But um, I always like to ask guests, what advice would you give younger you, or somebody first coming into the industry, right? Looking at manufacturing as a trade, and we've had the conversation, it's different now than it was 20, 30 years ago. What advice would you give somebody, your younger self, or to somebody starting in the industry?
If I was to be able to talk to younger me, I would say, chill out a little, dude. You know, Ch- chill. So when you're 29 years old, don't be pissed off that you're not the CEO of the company. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Just chill. You're going to get there, but keep moving forward. Keep learning. Keep always stay ahead on the newest techniques. Manufacturing is a constantly changing monster,
Yeah.
and do not rest on on your what you learned 5 years ago, because it's going to change.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a 60-year-old man, and I'm learning about AI. Right? I have to be engaged. I have to be engaged to learn about the new things as they come along. In my day, it was, I can remember back in McDonnell Douglas, I was in, total quality management or in quality circles, right?
Yeah.
And then came lean, and
Yep.
then came Six Sigma, and all of that. You've got to stay on top of that. Don't rest on the one thing. Always add to your repertoire.
Yeah.
Always add to your learning, and move on, and just chill out for a little bit, and always, and this is probably a little deeper than you want, but always treat everybody decent. One of the things that I've run into lately is what I call, or what I've heard called, and I didn't come up with it, but it's called the main character syndrome. A
Yes.
lot of us have main character syndrome. We think we are the star of our own movie, and we are. But we just get really frustrated as to why all of the supporting actors don't understand that we're the star and they don't fulfill the role that we want them to fulfill in order to make our movie the best movie that we can possibly have. You got to understand that everybody else is the main character in their own movie and you're a supporting actor in that. So doing what you can do to help their movie be better is going to make yours better. And so just chill out a little bit, enjoy people, enjoy the fact that everybody's learning and trying to get through, whether it's in manufacturing or just in life in general, that everybody's learning and having patience and teaching people how to do things is, for me, is one of the joys of my life, is being able to just teach people how to do things new and get them to learn. I will tell you that one of the greatest things that has spurred me on through my career is you teach a class in a manufacturing plant about something like total productive maintenance or SMED or digital transformation or whatever.
Yeah.
And about halfway through the third day of a class, the light bulb comes on and people are like, I get it. That is the moment that makes all the time worth it for me is when they go, oh, I get it. And I understand what this is all about. And they learn that new thing. And then when they learn that new thing, you've done your job.
Yep.
And you can move on to the next thing. So anyways, that's probably a little more philosophical than you wanted, but yeah, that's
hey, I asked the question. That's your answer. Yeah, I want it as deep or as shallow as you want to be, Eric. I have zero expectations of what your answer is going to be. If I didn't want the answer, I wouldn't have asked the question.
Great.
So, Eric, as we wrap up, the last question I ask every single guest is, what haven't I asked you that you want to share with the listeners or viewers of the show?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we probably should talk about is just how much manufacturing is changing when it comes to the technology on the shop floor.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal, right? We talked a little bit about AI. We talked a little bit about machine learning, all of those things. It just is phenomenal what I see going on the shop floor, and that manufacturers really do have to, gosh, it's really time to get on board with this stuff, right? We, as a grumpy old dude, I can say, AI and this and that, and have a problem with it. But guess what? It's here. Yeah. And if you don't get on board, you're going to be behind. It's just like, I was telling somebody this the other day. It's just like back in the early days of lean. There were companies who were looking at things like lean manufacturing and total productive maintenance going, we don't need to do that. Right. We're okay. We're all right. Guess what? 2 years later, they're behind the 8 ball. They're behind. They didn't get on board. The same thing is happening right now when it comes to digital transformation. And if you're not on board, if you're not ahead of it right now, you're going to be left behind. It's going to be just like you decided to stop playing video games for 5 years, and then you decided to go pick up and play video games. That 5-year gap, you're going to be so far behind, you're not ever going to be able to catch up. Right? The same thing is happening right now with technology on the shop floor, and companies have to understand that.
Well, and I want to touch on that a little bit because the AI has been around for years at this point, right? If you've had an iPhone for any length of time, Siri is AI. I know that people are scared. They need to understand that they've been surrounded by AI for a while, and it's just now presenting itself in this digital transformation space in a different way than they're used to. And people really need to start being comfortable being uncomfortable when it comes to it, or they are going to get left behind. Do you think I'm off base in that?
No. You're exactly right. I think what's important, and this is coming from my standpoint here at working for a software company, is that we have to create an environment people can be comfortable to use the technology. I go to these conferences and I go to trade shows and I listen to people talk about AI and machine learning, and it's up here. It really is just up here, and it has no use for the factory worker. The factory worker doesn't know how it's going to help them. It's important for us to create an environment where we create, and I was using this term the other day, AI for the shop floor.
I
right?
like it.
But the shop floor worker has to be comfortable to use it so that it helps them get better, and not necessarily feel like it's Big Brother or like it's feeding them false information or it's feeding them information that they can't trust or it's over their head, right? You can ask AI a question and it's going to give you an answer that may be above your learning level, or it
Yep.
may be above your vocabulary level. And if the first time that happens, you're done.
Yep.
And so we have to create a tool that the shop floor worker can use as a help to
Yep.
help them get better on the shop floor. And so it really, yeah, you're exactly right. There's a lot of nuances that have to go on right now. The one thing that we see is that, you know, the other side of this question for manufacturing people is just security of data and access to the information, right? So as we use AI, we are only using AI. The AI that people are using inside of factories is only as good as the data that they have collected prior, because we're not jumping outside of their systems to go get the data. We're only using the data that they are using within inside of their own secure systems.
Yep.
And so we're not, as an example, we can't go out and jump out. If somebody asks, tell me what a grade 8 bolt is, right?
Right.
We're not going to go grab all the information from the fastener providers and all that stuff. It's got to be inside of that secure system, because
Yep.
people don't want the outside world to have access, and they don't want the inside world to go out and grab data from the outside.
Yep.
There's a lot of security that has to go around that, especially in manufacturing. So
Yep.
that's one of the
And
issues.
we'll jump into that when we record the other episode or the other show. And I'm happy that you agreed to do that. I kind of put you on the spot on the air here, but
it's totally
that's
good.
Okay. Eric, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It was a great conversation, folks. That's a wrap for another conversation, and what an incredible conversation it was. From his early days, at McDonnell Douglas, to his role as now as Director of Industrial Transformation at L2L. Eric's journey is absolutely amazing. It was really fun to hear it progress and his career continue on. We've learned so much about his passion for operational excellence. We heard a little bit about his time at OSU, his love for fly fishing, his amazing and supportive wife. So thank you, Eric, for sharing your story with us today.
You bet.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. Don't forget to check out our website at themfgconnector.com for more insights, updates, and episodes. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay connected with the latest in culture and innovation. And if you're hungry for more stories and solutions and stories, make sure to watch our new show, The Manufacturing Connector, on YouTube. It's a resource for those of you looking to solve your manufacturing challenges. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please, please, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, your grandma, or anyone else who loves a good story about the human side of manufacturing. And I'd love it if you'd take a quick moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback not only helps us bring more amazing content to you, but it also rockets us up the charts so more people find out about the show. There's some weird algorithm in all these platforms where if you like and review or rate and review a show, it actually promotes it more. So folks, thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. Have a great rest of your day.